Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Okay. Just getting control of things at the beginning of the day here. Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. I guess, I don't know. I can't keep track anymore. Is today the solstice? Not the solstice, but the spring equinox? That's what it appears to be, according to the tweet from Jew Who Has It All, or not tweet, but toot. Thank you very much. Please differentiate. And tracks all these sorts of things, has the calendar even greater and wider than the old NAFTA refrigerator calendar, which we don't have anymore. We have a different refrigerator calendar this year, which has been a disappointment in my view. But, I think we'll get past it anyway. Spring equinox greetings, she says, to all of my hemisphere. That's true, too. Don't forget, there's a whole half of the world for whom it is not the spring equinox. And, all right, all the best, of course, for Ostara. How do you like that as my pronunciation on that? Wiccans and pagans. Wiccan and pagan friends, happy or best for, as she says, Ostara, and followers who celebrate. And, of course, all the best for Nowruz to my Persian, Zoroastrian, and Baha'i friends and followers. Got it all for today. They have it all, and now we have it all as well. We've both got it all. That's fantastic news. My calendar says that the first day of spring was yesterday for some reason. And I think that's, I think I must have not the NAFTA calendar, but the meteorological calendar on my refrigerator now, because I think they make the 20th, the first day of spring, even though the equinox, I guess, should be the first day of spring. I don't know. It's a dispute we shouldn't be bothering to mediate. We're not qualified to jump in there. Today has all sorts of weird and strange news, and I'm hopeful that we can share even a small part of it, or even figure out what a small part of it is, because a lot of it was gleaned this morning via Mastodon, and when I park those things in Pocket, it just sort of gives me, there's no photo that goes with it, often no headline. It's just the name of the person whose toot I have grabbed, and sometimes we don't know what that's all about. Although sometimes people come with a little hints, like if it's Judd Legum, you have some idea of what that's going to be about. All right, we're in for another wild ride, I guess, maybe today, if we are looking and tracking and trying to decide what's going on with Donald Trump. He, of course, has this tremendous interest, for whatever reason, in having everybody know that or think that he's about to get arrested. Whether or not that's actually true, we don't know. Indictments probably coming. Whether there will be arrests and arraignments that don't just involve him walking into the courthouse, exiting from a limousine, walking in, walking out. I don't think we're going to see any sort of perp walk kind of thing. And whatever. Okay, let's see. Mighty OCD says Equinox was yesterday. Jew Who Has It All has it wrong. Jew Who Has It Wrong, I guess is really how she should be tweeting. Equinox was yesterday. I always thought it was the 21st, but I guess the calendar's got it. Maybe with daylight savings time, we're screwing things up. We moved it up a day. Of course, others suggest, or Mighty OCD suggests, that today must be the Eastern Orthodox Equinox, which could be true, even though we divide these things into northern and southern when it comes to hemisphere. When it comes to being late, your Eastern Orthodox are the ones to blame, except, you know how it is with calendars and the relative assumption that the other one is wrong. Okay, well, anyway, I don't know. Not sure what to tell you. Oh, APB Blue says, wouldn't Eastern Orthodox Equinox be about 2 weeks from now? Yes, no, maybe. It's a running joke. You know how it works here. All right, let's see. Other things in Pocket. It's like I said, it's a crazy day. Or we're going to make it a crazy day. It's a regular day. There's news like this all the time. Just for some reason today, it really struck me how much weird and disparate news was also somehow interesting to me. I'm just sort of open-minded that way. And today I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be fun to talk about this wide variety of subjects? All right, let's see. In courtroom news today, while everybody watches to see whether there's an indictment and whether that means anything for Donald Trump or others, I mean, I guess something has to be happening. Apparently, the New York City Police Department was put on some sort of alert that all officers, including those who ordinarily would be reporting to work in plain clothes, were ordered to be on hand and ready and to appear on the street in uniform after 7 a.m. in anticipation of some sort of wild situation, whether it's an actual disturbance or just showing a strong police presence in the area so that no disturbances break out if there was, in fact, a need for Trump to report to a courthouse for an indictment, arraignment, what have you. And interestingly enough, also, I happened to see, I should have put this aside, but I've put so many things, away in pocket, it's like hard to tell what I'm going to really get to and what I'm not. But apparently there are, weirdos on Twitter, MAGA types, who are circulating pictures of the New York City police force readying itself and spreading, the kind of weirdo conspiracy theories only they can be responsible for, like that these are police who are getting ready to battle. Here it is. Is this the one? Here we have Steve M. No More Mr., or, as in No More Mr. Nice Guy blog, who toots around when you not only think that pro-Trump rioters are Antifa, but also think the cops are Antifa. We have a picture of the tweet of Tamara Hiler, Hiler, just one L. Anyway, who circulates a photo of the cops with a caption that says NYPD mobilizes 700 riot cops, puts up steel barricades ahead of P, and then it trails off, I guess, President Trump. He's not the president anymore, by the way. New York Police Department preparing for civil disorder should the Manhattan District Attorney's Office order the arrest of former, Tamara's, all caps pronouncement here. Wow, they are getting ready for Antifa and BLM rioters dressed as Trump supporters tomorrow. Guess they will be arresting their own. And way to be on top of reality there, Tamara. Just thought I would note for you what's going on in the world and what sorts of dumb things people believe about it. Let's see. How can I... one of the problems I have in bringing these things up in the tweet deck-like display that, what do I use here? Mastodon party something. Anyway, is it's very odd, and it makes it difficult to properly display and pocket these things. All right. Well, I'll try and pocket it and see if I don't know. Maybe you want to see the picture, or maybe you want to see the picture of the cops. Maybe you want to see a picture of the craziness that people are sending around, assuring themselves that their stupid conspiracy theories are right about all this. And that if anybody riots over Trump's, indictment or arrest, it'll really be not Trump supporters, but yes, Antifa dressed, and BLM, of course, all dressing as Trump supporters, because it's so easy for BLM folks to pass as, rabid Trump supporters. Okay, well, whatever. Let's see. Other strange news. I'm telling you, there's a lot. But before I get to the really weird stuff, other courtroom news, just a reminder, I put aside the story just for the headline, really, as a reminder from The Guardian, of all people, to remind us what's going on here in the United States, that the Fox News versus Dominion lawsuit finally heads to trial. They go to court today. Let's see what stage they're in here. Lawyers for Fox News and voting equipment company Dominion will face off in a Delaware courtroom on Tuesday, that's today, and Delaware, that's this country, just in case you were wondering. In the latest phase of Dominion's closely watched blank, how many dollars is it worth? Defamation suit, $1.6 billion. Makes it easy to remember, of course, that when Smartmatic gets around to filing their lawsuit, it's just one up from both sides of the decimal point, $2.7 billion. Anyway, court filings leading up to the hearing, of course, have produced stunning internal messages. That's what we've been talking about all this time, is just filings and pleadings. But the courtroom antics, I guess, begin today. Again, I'm not 100% sure what phase we're in, and we could read all the way through and see if they tell us, are they just starting with motions today of some sort that they're hearing? Are they going to start with jury selection? Or is it all set and is today day one of the trial? I don't know, but it's finally underway. And whichever it is, it's still going to be several days before they toss this thing to a jury, and so it's still some time before we find out, okay, well, what do we actually think in terms of liability for Fox News, and how much might they be ordered to pay? And then, of course, the appeals process, if any, and could be a long, long time before things are finally settled. Rupert Murdoch could be dead by the time they finally settle these things, and I'm sure that's what he's kind of hoping for at this point. All right. Just wanted to let you know where we were with that and that was happening. Now we can get to this other collection of weird news. Well, let's see. So how will we wind our way through this? There's another courtroom drama maybe playing out. This I thought was an interesting bit of news reported by Reuters that Greta Thunberg and other climate activists get the nod from the courts to sue the Swedish state, which I think means the country of Sweden, as opposed to, maybe Sweden has a federation of various states. I don't know whether they're suing a region of Sweden or the Swedish state itself. I think that's what's implied to me by the headline. And here is a fun picture of Greta. I don't know whether it's current. Yes, it's from January, and she's dressed up in her winter gear with mittens and everything. And, I wasn't sure whether this is a picture of her when she was just starting out or is current or whatever. She's still a kid, so it's difficult to tell what age kid is this. But anyway, this kid is going to sue the government of Sweden, presumably for not doing enough to combat climate change. And sure, why the hell not? Sounds interesting. Let's see what the particulars are on this one. A Swedish court gave Greta Thunberg and hundreds of other climate activists the go-ahead on Tuesday to proceed with a class action lawsuit against the Swedish state for, quote, insufficient climate policy. Why not? Give it a try. I don't know anything about the Swedish legal system, but apparently they do, and they say, okay, let's do it. Thunberg and 600 other young activists in a group called Aurora sued the Swedish state in November, claiming it had to do more to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius in order to live up to the European Convention on Human Rights. That's the legal basis on which they proceed. It's not like you've deviated from the ancient royal Swedish meatball recipe or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward, easy to understand. Not something you'd likely get away with here in the United States, but why would you even try? Because, of course, I assume we're not party to the European Convention on Human Rights, although the United States being what it is, maybe we are. I don't know. We're not European, but we very well may have meddled in telling Europeans how to handle their human rights. I actually don't know. Not that you would be able to enforce that in an American court, because we're weird about these things. On Tuesday, Nacka District Court, it's N-A-C-K-A, Nacka District Court said the lawsuit could go ahead after the group made adjustments to the claim. That's not to say that there isn't a Swedish Supreme Court who might yet say, no, you can't. But the District Court has today issued a summons in a high-profile class action lawsuit, the court said in a statement. In the case, demands have been made for the district court to determine that the state has an obligation to take certain specified measures to limit climate change. The Swedish state has 3 months to respond to the lawsuit before the case could be heard or settled in writing. the district court said, adding it could not say when the suit might be decided. Even they don't know that much about the Swedish legal system, or at least enough to be able to predict exactly when it would happen. But we couldn't predict ours either. The Chancellor of Justice did not immediately respond to an emailed request for comment. Aurora wants the court to decide that Sweden needs to cut emissions by at least 6.5 to 9.4 million tons, and remember this is international reporting, so tons is T-O-N-N-E-S, tonnes, of CO2, carbon dioxide, per year, starting from 2019, which, as you know, is in the past. Anyway, the health and future of the planet, despite the fact that we're talking about the past, and that of ours, the health and future of the planet, and that of ours. This may be a translation, and it might make more sense in Swedish, but I guess our health and future, it's a little awkward in English, is directly dependent on whether or not our politicians recognize the seriousness of the climate crisis, and so Aurora wants to do everything we can to get you to do so, the group said in an open letter to the Swedish government last year. Dear Swedish government, signed Aurora. You get the idea. On Monday, UN Secretary General, I don't even remember who the Secretary General is, but now I know, Antonio Guterres. How about that? He warned that the climate time bomb is ticking. So he's with him on that, as he urged rich nations to slash emissions sooner after a new assessment from scientists said there was little time to lose in tackling climate change. So there you go. He's in agreement with her there, and we'll see. One, when that decision comes in. Two, what Sweden has in mind about doing with it. And three, whether that impacts the rest of the world or not. But interesting news nonetheless. I just, found it kind of fascinating. And it was courtroom related, so I thought I'd go right to that. Totally unrelated to anything, however. Let's see what else I have here in Pocket that I found from Mastodon. What are these things? Okay. Oh, yeah. Some interesting business news. I don't usually get intrigued by business news, but two weird stories. Let's see. One was this, maybe all the story that we need is a little pull quote here. This from a Wall Street Journal story that we won't be able to read, really, unless maybe you can find a way to read it in Pocket, but the headline being job listings abound, which, maybe is a good thing, but many are fake, which seems like a bad thing. That's interesting. In an uncertain economy, it begins in the preview here, but it cuts off. In an uncertain economy, companies post ads for jobs that I guess are fake. So here's the pull quote that's in the toot here. Ann Lipton has grabbed this thing and says, as a quote, among those who said they advertised job postings that they weren't actively trying to fill, close to half said that they kept the ads up to give the impression that the company was growing. I thought that was rather ingenious, it was ingenious, but disingenuous. Wow, okay. It is, but what an interesting thing. And I guess that's driven, akin to like our short-term quarterly reporting sort of style of approaching business, right? Like long-term, it might not be so great or just plain unethical in some way. But look, we have to give the impression that the company's growing to keep what? The stock price boosted so that the bosses are happy or whatever else. But there's another even stranger reason to keep these listings up, which I thought was equally weird and nefarious. 1/3 of the managers who said they advertised jobs they weren't trying to fill said they kept the listings up to placate overworked employees, right? So you have people who are working their butts off and are tired and are like, when are we going to get some new people in here to help out with this? And the bosses say, well, you see, I'm advertising. You can see here, look, I listed the job in the paper. We're looking for somebody to help with that. And then people say, I only have to hang on a little while longer. Eventually, someone else will be brought on board to help with this workload. But the bosses actually have no intention whatsoever of filling that job. They just want the overworked employees to think that they are so that they'll continue for the time being to do this extra work in the mistaken belief that they're going to get help with it in the short term. I thought that was really kind of fascinating. And the whole article might be extremely interesting, but we're going to let Ann Lipton tell us what the coolest part of that is and just believe her on that. In order to get to another weird story, this one in Bloomberg, which may also mean that I'm not able to read the entire thing because their paywalls are fairly robust, which is too bad because I really would like to find out a little more detail on this one, but just another weird business story. How do they build a headline here? I don't know. But I happened to see it via the toot of Antonio Santos, who, let's see, can I get, will they let me into this article? Probably not. But at any rate, the headline is, JP Morgan owned the LME, that's London Metal Exchange. We're talking about commodity exchange here. JP Morgan owned the LME nickel, the metal, the nickel, that was actually bags of stones. That sort of gives the story away just as well because I can't read you the full story. Some bullet points right underneath here that serve as sort of subheaders in the Bloomberg format here. Bank had put the metal onto the exchange early last year. Right, it's a commodities exchange. They owned some nickel. They were looking to sell it. Development is the latest headache for JP Morgan's commodities unit. Apparently they have several. JP Morgan Chase and Company owned the London Metal Exchange nickel contracts that turned out to be backed by bags of stones rather than metal, according to people familiar with the matter. I mean, you know, at some level, it's all the same in the sense that, like, well, the whole money exchange was backed by what? A bag of metal? Who cares? But I mean, in this case, the metal is supposed to have inherent value. It's nickel. Stones apparently don't have inherent value unless they're certain kinds of stones, like pure carbon stones of one sort or another. Some stones have intrinsic value, but I guess not these stones. The LME last week announced that it had canceled 9 nickel contracts worth about $1.3 million after discovering, quote, irregularities at a certain warehouse, which Bloomberg has reported was owned by Access World. That means nothing to me, but maybe something to you. The news has been met with shock. Shock, I tell you. Dramatic shock. Maybe. Or, I don't know, when they found out that, it was met with shock in the metals world because LME contracts are generally viewed as beyond question. And then someone said, oh, good, I've bought myself a bag o' nickel, I guess. It looks like nickel comes in the form of, like ball bearings is basically what it looks like, except they don't bear any weight. But they're little balls of nickel. And, looks like fun. Looks like they might make your hands dirty if you handle them barehanded. So this guy has gloves on. And then you open it up and you find out it's rocks, and we have other sound effects for when that happens, I guess. Gotta edit that thing and see if we can get rid of that little sting in the middle of that one. Anyway, I don't know. I just want to use all my sound effects so that I can say things like, okay, we're still talking about nickel, and then boring. Okay, we'll get to the end of the story here. It's not all available anyway, so pretty soon it fades out from view. JP Morgan was the owner of the 9 invalidated contracts, according to people familiar with the matter. The bank registered the bags of material as being deliverable against LME contracts in early 2022, said the people who asked not to be identified, discussing private information. There's no suggestion that JP Morgan did anything wrong. Well, I mean, a little bit. They didn't look in the bag. The material was already inside Access World's Rotterdam warehouse when the bank bought it several years ago, according to one of the people. I guess we're going to have considerably more here. I was wondering, like, good, they're letting me read it. That's nice. Bloomberg decided to let me read it after all. Flip the switch. I was curious because I read about this and mentioned something at home, and production staff said, how much effing nickel are we talking about here? You get to $1.3 million worth of nickel's not that valuable. But it heads up, it highlights an interesting situation, right? The nickel that they bought was sitting in the warehouse. Somebody else owned it, and then they bought it. And I don't know what drives the decisions to say, I'm going to actually take possession of the nickel as opposed to simply trading the futures on it or whatever else. But the bag of nickel basically was sitting in a warehouse. The job of the warehouse is to store it for whichever idiot bank wants to own nickel. And so some dumbass bank owned nickel and sold it to dumbass bank JP Morgan. And they were like, okay, that nickel is ours now. It doesn't have to go anywhere. It doesn't have to move. So you could see where a warehouse worker might be like, they never use this nickel. Nobody ever buys the nickel. They don't make stuff out of the nickel. It just sits in the warehouse. One bank owns it for 10 years and they sell it to another bank. And then we switch the signs on the shelf where the bag is or whatever. I'm going to take this nickel, which is apparently valuable enough that people are buying and selling it on exchanges and making tremendous amount of money. And I don't know, sell it for scrap or whatever we do. Or maybe I just think they're cool and I want to give them out to my friends, and I'll replace them with a bag of rocks, and no one will be any of the wiser, because who looks in the bag? Because I don't know. It's bonded. It's in the warehouse. And the whole gig is because we're so trusted and so trustworthy here in this warehouse and in this business world, no one's ever going to bother to open the thing and look. So I don't know. We don't know when this stuff was stolen. Anyway, I was just wondering, how do you steal all that nickel? It turns out that there's more to the story. The warehouse is just, the place that holds it. And like I said, everybody's supposed to be above reproach in all of this. Still, its central role in another nickel crisis, JP Morgan's, that is, will be a headache for the bank. Let's find out why after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Bet you didn't think you would be coming back from the first break, finding yourself on the edge of your seat, waiting to hear what's up in the nickel markets in London. But I don't know, I find it kind of weird and fascinating. And let's do it here. The JP Morgan's commodities business has apparently been under scrutiny since last year's nickel problem. What was the nickel problem? Last year's nickel problem was a short squeeze on the LME, which means things, where it played a key part as the largest counterparty to Chinese tycoon Zhang Guangda's, that's my best attempt at what is spelled out here in anglicized terms, Zhang Guangda's short position. I know just enough to know kind of, sort of, maybe what they're talking about, but I couldn't describe exactly what was going on. But you see the point here. There was another one of these weird situations arose because of what people do with these commodities and selling futures on them and yada, yada, yada. But But this is of a different sort. Like, not having the nickel at all in the bag is actually kind of interesting and cool in a Ocean's 11 sort of way. JP Morgan declined to comment. The bank's ownership of the 9 invalidated nickel warrants was first reported by Fast Markets. So, I don't know. Subscribe to them if you want the latest nickel news before all your competitors. Access World said it is inspecting the warranted, quote unquote, warranted bags of nickel. That's interesting. I wonder exactly what that means, warranted. Like, is Access World saying we guarantee that what's in those bags is nickel, and then if it's not, then it's our fault and we have to pay somebody something? Maybe. Well, anyway, they're inspecting the bags of nickel briquettes at its location. That's interesting. That doesn't sound like what the little ball bearing type looking things of nickel that they showed in the picture are. I guess it's just a different shape, but I'd like to see those now. I'm thinking of like charcoal briquettes. I imagine they're, square-ish, but I don't know. Weird. Okay. So they're inspecting this stuff, but Access World says it believes that the issue that led to the 9 warrants being suspended is an isolated case and specific to one warehouse in Rotterdam. That's just Access Rotterdam. Access World, like worldwide, is there a reason to believe that all of their bags of nickel are in fact bags of rocks? They say no. If I had 2 bags of nickels to rub together, I would be able to tell you whether they were rocks or bags of nickel. It's not clear whether the bags ever contained nickel, which is also interesting, and whether the issue is the result of an error, theft, or fraud. Error would be interesting, like, oops, I thought nickel was rocks. So I just, I didn't really realize that there really was such a thing as nickel. I just understood that we needed a heavy bag of some sort. Or did somebody just steal it? Under the LME's rules, warehouses are responsible for inspecting and verifying metal. Warehouses are required to hold insurance, while physical metal traders typically are insured against risks such as theft. Okay. So, insurers will pay for all of this in the end, but this is a good question. What happens to the nickel? What they do with it? Who stole it? Why did they do it? And how easy is it to walk around with nickel briquettes and, get something cool in exchange for it? The discovery has set off a wider scramble across the metals world, with warehouse companies racing over the weekend to re-inspect and reweigh thousands of tons of metal after the LME asked them to verify all the nickel currently on warrant. And really, honestly, they probably are starting to think maybe we should do that with all of our everythings, whatever's measurable this way. And it all has to be measurable in order to be traded as a commodity. How do we know that there is as much tin as they say? If they trade tin, I don't know. But certainly gold, silver, platinum, yada, yada, right? Whatever else there is out there being traded, even if they do trade rocks, weigh the rocks. Are any of these bags what they say? And, what did it remind me of as I was reading through this, re-inspect and reweigh a wider, I don't know. All of a sudden I was thinking of, hey, that reminds me of, and then I forgot in the space of the time it took me to read this sentence. What was it? Well, anyway, but just generally, I guess, you want to re-inspect everything and make sure that things are what they say they are. For that matter, members of Congress, are their resumes real? Somebody ought to check. Does Fort Knox have the gold that it says? Did Steve Mnuchin actually steal it all like we suggested that he did before? Or just take a couple bars of it? Or did somebody take a couple of little briquettes of nickel out because they thought they were cool and just like to display them in their house? Not that they were trying to walk around buying things with blocks of nickel or anything of the sort. Weigh the bags. Make sure you have what you're supposed to have. And it's just, just sort of interesting. Like, is the world financial market built on BS once again? We may find out after they weigh all the bags nickel out there. The LME has also been carrying out its own inspections in Europe and Asia, one of the people said. So far, the mass inspection has found no other issues with LME material. the person said. Although that's what I would say if I was trying to save my job too. JP Morgan is a leading bank in metals markets, but it has been at the center of several high-profile crises in the past year. It reported a $120 million loss related to nickel a year ago. I'd stop trading the nickels, honestly. In the wake of that short squeeze centered on Zhang and his company, the company is Tsingshan, or Tsingshan, perhaps, Holding Group Company. That means nothing, but I just wanted to give it a shot to pronounce the name. It also had been financing relationships, or had a financing relationship with Chinese copper trader Meike Metals International Limited, which ran into trouble last summer and last month said it was working on a debt restructuring. Bloomberg reported last year that JP Morgan was reviewing its commodity exposure. No word, therefore, it seems we've reached the end on how much nickel that is, in terms of weight, and what does it take to lose track of $1.3 million worth of nickel, but maybe that's not exactly what happened. $1.3 million worth of contracts are in question because something went wrong, even if there's only a pound of nickel missing. Anyway, so there you go. And if you keep scrolling on this page, you get to other cool stuff like Agarwal squeezes zinc unit to pay $1.3 billion in dividends. How do you like that? So, a lot of metal squeezing going on out there. I didn't realize that it was so squeezable. The nickel, so squeezably soft, it's irresistible. And if you're old enough to remember what we're talking about, congratulations to you. Okay, I got to go back to Pocket now. But thanks to Antonio Santos for tooting that around the Mastodon world. So, yeah, kind of weird, fascinating things going on out there that are just, they just underlie the world economy and all of that. And we may crash it over here anyway when we do the debt ceiling thing with Republicans. But if we don't crash it, the nickel people apparently will. All right. So, I don't know. I found that kind of weird and worthwhile as a diversion from the rest of the day's news. Which, you never know how you're going to feel about these things when you find out what's really going on in the world. Let's see. Here's interesting commentary from Amanda Marcotte, as usual. I thought this was an interesting angle. She always finds interesting angles on these things. Yesterday, we mentioned that, the Republicans are kind of, sort of, they're playing a weird game with the Donald Trump possible indictments and arrests thing. We were fascinated to learn from Greg yesterday about the possibility that Ron DeSantis would find himself trapped and somehow being manipulated by Donald Trump in the face of the looming indictment. And in fact, by the way, that did come to pass exactly as predicted, which is amazing to me, that somehow Donald Trump was able to manipulate Ron DeSantis, as the two are rivals, or are about to become rivals, I guess, officially speaking, in their contest for the Republican nomination for president in 2024. Ordinarily, you would think Guy A gets indicted while he's running in a primary against Guy B. Guy B is going to say, this is awesome. I'm going to tell everybody, you don't want to vote for the guy who's been indicted. That guy's a scumbag. Only scumbags get indicted. I mean, he'll probably, too, will be indicted one day about something else, but it doesn't matter for now. And vote for me, the non-indicted guy. But Donald Trump had effed with the brains, such as they were, of everybody in the Republican Party, to the extent that he had somehow set it up where, if you don't join me in attacking the prosecutors who would indict me, then you're going to lose MAGA support, and you can't win without that. But I mean, if it's, if MAGA support is personal to Donald Trump, like he owns it and can take it with him wherever he goes, then it was never yours to get. And so, but there's this weird interplay of people who, I like both of them, and I like them both very much, and I'll take Ron DeSantis if he wins. But my first preference is for Trump, or I am loyal to Trump, or I have always have a soft spot in my heart for Trump, whatever these people might be thinking. And if you don't come to his defense, I'm going to be angry at you. And I just couldn't really believe that that would work. But then again, it's MAGA and they're dumb. And so I guess it really could work. It turns out that it did, in fact, work. The Hill reported yesterday, and I grabbed it and put it away. DeSantis slams Manhattan DA in first remarks on potential Trump indictment. So, yeah, it kind of did work. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis weighed in on Monday, and it's always funny to talk about weighing in when it's Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, on former President Trump's possible criminal indictment in New York, breaking a 2-day silence. Finally, at long last, he has to decide what to do. He breaks the silence on Trump's claim that he will be arrested this week, which probably won't even be true. So it's doubly confounding in that sense. Asked about the rumored indictment during an event, DeSantis lambasted, so we go with that pronunciation of it. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, whose office is investigating the hush money paid to a porn star, we know which one, on Trump's behalf during the 2016 campaign, calling him, this is an interesting attack to make. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but none of the situation makes any sense. Calling the prosecutor here, Alvin Bragg, a Soros-funded prosecutor and accusing him of weaponizing his office. You know, see there, a reference to the weaponization of government subcommittee thing. That's their new theme. So he's right on task here and doing the team work that's required of him. I've seen rumors swirl. I've not seen any facts yet. This is a quote from DeSantis. So I don't know what's going to happen, said DeSantis, a likely 2024 Republican presidential hopeful. But I do know this. The Manhattan District Attorney is a Soros-funded prosecutor, and so he, like other Soros-funded prosecutors, they weaponize their office to impose a political agenda on society at the expense of the rule of law and public safety. DeSantis didn't mention Trump by name. I'm sure that was carefully crafted. You know, we got to respond, but I don't want to, boost him too much, but I have to do the minimum. What's the minimum necessary to not get attacked by MAGA? And this is what they came up with. He chose instead to grill Bragg over his approach to crime in New York City. Though he drew a laugh from the audience, he did take a dig, I guess, when he quipped that he doesn't, quote, know what's going into paying hush money to a porn star to secure silence over some type of alleged affair. So he is reminding everybody what's at the heart of all of this. He's really feeling put upon by having to defend Trump and all of this, but I guess he came to the conclusion it was absolutely necessary, but still tried to get a dig in at the end. But what I can speak to is if you have a prosecutor who is ignoring crimes happening every single day in his jurisdiction, no evidence of that being true, but whatever, and he chooses to go back many, many years ago to try to use something about porn star hush money payments, that's an example of pursuing a political agenda and weaponizing the office, he said. It is not, of course. It is a example of taking white collar crime seriously and actually prosecuting it and not pretending that it's not crime because the collars and often people are white, even if they're actually orange at the time. Still, DeSantis also noted that his office would not be involved in the case in any way, signaling that he has no plans to help Trump fight extradition to New York should he face charges. That's a reality too, right? I mean, he's residing in Florida. And I have wondered in the past whether DeSantis would fight him or help him or somehow try to stay neutral in all of that, should it come to that. The remarks were DeSantis' first on the potential indictment since Trump claimed in a Saturday post on his social media site that he would be arrested on Tuesday and urged his supporters to protest any possible criminal charges against him. DeSantis' initial silence on the matter kicked off a pressure campaign by Trump's allies who raised questions about why the Florida governor hadn't chimed in on the former president's claims. Other current and prospective Republican presidential candidates, including former Vice President Mike Pence and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, came out in defense of Trump over the weekend, casting Bragg's investigation as politically motivated. So that's apparently the path through the coals on this one. Ramaswamy specifically sought to pressure DeSantis and former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, one of the few declared Republican presidential candidates to condemn Bragg's, quote, political persecution through prosecution, unquote, of Trump. Not really that great of a line, but I'm sure he thought that was really fun, and alliteration was hilarious. So I switched over to that story before heading into what Amanda Marcotte had written, because the storyline yesterday was, one of the things I had brought up was that Kevin McCarthy was like urging calm and let's not have protests and riots if there is an indictment or even an arrest. And, you sort of wondered, well, I thought that they would want to whip up the crowd, particularly if they're successfully pressuring DeSantis into condemning the whole thing and condemning the Manhattan DA for even bringing the charges, et cetera, coming to Trump's defense. You would think they would demand the same of Kevin McCarthy and other Republicans on Capitol Hill. And they are. And I think that's what Amanda Marcotte is getting at. Despite the fact that there were at least superficial calls for calm, there's more to the story. She writes in Salon, GOP or GOP two-step, Republicans' call for calmness is betrayed by their not-so-subtle nod to MAGA violence. By covering for Trump's crimes, Mike Pence and Kevin McCarthy are validating Trump's incitement, she writes. Let's see how she supports the assertion here. If there is anyone in the GOP who should understand how dangerous Donald Trump's yearnings for violence are, it should be former Vice President Mike Pence, who he tried to have hanged. Along with Republican members of Congress, Pence was in danger of bodily harm or death on January 6th after Trump sicked a murderous mob on the Capitol to intimidate them into stealing the 2020 election for him. Pence was in particular danger as Trump lied to the crowd, telling them the vice president had the power to give him another term, but was simply refusing to do so. Hang Mike Pence, the insurrectionists chanted. Pence and his family cowered in fear while everyone in the building was in danger that day, including now Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy. The California Republican called Trump from his hiding spot during the riot, complaining, "They're trying to effing kill me." Well, Kevin, and you remember the quote, "I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are," Trump reportedly told McCarthy. So, one would think that Republicans would be a little more upset that Trump is doing it again, issuing all caps posts on Truth Social, demanding that his followers protest, take our nation back. In response to reports of an impending criminal indictment of the former president, "They're killing our nation." Or this is Trump. "They're killing our nation as we sit back and watch television. We must save America. Protest, protest, protest!" 3 exclamation points. He probably said aloud. While Trump hasn't explicitly called for violence in his relentless online screaming, there's no good faith denial that violence is his desire. Even mainstream media sources are pointing out that this language is, if anything, more over the top than the rhetoric he used to gin up a mob on January 6th. Yet, despite knowing how bad things can get, Republican leaders are giving Trump's incitement a boost of sweet, sweet validation. But hey, this time he's aiming his cannon at unhinged MAGA types at Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, not Congress. So I guess their attitude is YOLO. LOL, YOLO, nothing matters, right? They're not the target, so maybe they're okay with it. To be certain, many Republicans who are defending Trump are including ass-covering calls for nonviolence. McCarthy told supporters, "We want calmness out there." Pence said he wanted people to protest in a peaceful and lawful manner. Even the top Republican troll in the House, Representative, as we know her, Murdery Trader Green of Georgia, tweeted, "We don't need to protest." That's actually, like poorly phrased. How does that even cover your ass? That's just contradicting Trump outright. But I don't know. It might have been a mistake and she's dumb and doesn't know how to word things, but it might have been an outright challenge to Trump's primacy too. I mean, she's probably in the position to sort of test, can she, slyly just outright say the opposite of what Trump says and still not get in trouble with people. It would be an interesting thing to test. I mean, Trump says protest, 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 and she says we don't need to protest. Anyway, none of these calls for peace, Amanda argues, should be taken at face value because they are embedded in a larger rhetorical strategy of affirmation for Trump's lies and excuse-making for any violence that results. If McCarthy was serious about opposing violence, he would criticize Trump's unsubtle encouragement of terrorism. Instead, he's running cover for Trump with rambling comments claiming Trump was trying to educate people about what's going on and that anyone who sees the obvious threat in Trump's comments is just misinterpreting Trump. McCarthy also validated Trump's lie that this is a witch hunt by releasing a statement claiming the indictment, which, mind you, hasn't even happened yet, is, quote, nonetheless, an outrageous abuse of power by a radical DA. McCarthy's language echoed the demonizing language that Trump has been unloading on Bragg, all of which serves to paint a target on the district attorney's back. McCarthy's empty call for calmness is irrelevant here. By echoing Trump's lies and excusing Trump's inciting language, McCarthy is signaling tacit approval for MAGA violence, even if he can't admit as much to himself. Pence is playing a similar word game. At a time when there's a crime wave in New York City, the fact that the Manhattan DA thinks that indicting President Trump is his top priority, we don't know that that's the case, it's just one of his things that he's doing, just tells you everything you need to know about the radical left in this country, he said in response to the reports of an impending indictment. He also immediately undercut his call for peaceful protest by invoking the largely imaginary violence that occurred in cities throughout this country in the summer of 2020. Never mind the violence that almost murdered him. Whatever Pence thinks he's doing, by pivoting to leftist, quote, violence that happens mainly in the fantasies of Republicans, the main effect of his words is to justify right-wing violence. We've heard this time and again from January 6th insurrectionists and their sympathizers who argue that any violence they do is okay because of the supposed violence of the left. Of course, the vast majority of said leftist violence is simply made-up nonsense on Fox News, but that doesn't change how it's interpreted by right-wing audiences as permission for their own very real urges toward political violence. It's the same story with murdery traitor Greene. Her throat-clearing about not protesting is less important than the fact that she's working overtime at generating conspiracy theories to rationalize any MAGA violence that does happen. When asked for comment from the Daily Beast, she rambled on about how, quote, federal agents who infiltrate political movements and attempt to incite political violence. The message to any would-be terrorists, if you commit an act of violence, don't worry, because Greene is ready to step in and paint you as a hero and a victim, just as she does with the January 6th insurrectionists. On Monday, Representative Jim Jordan, the rape enabler from Ohio, upped the ante again by kickstarting congressional harassment of Bragg. And included by way of proof here, the tweet of Manu Raju, who says Jim Jordan and two other chairmen sent letters to Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg asking him to testify on his probe into Trump and hush money payments. They want to have hearings about the investigation, you see. Jordan says he doesn't know the full scope of the potential charges. We don't think President Trump broke the law at all, he told me. Well, so what? Don't we ask the court to settle that question? Yes, we do. The gaslight is thick, as usual, with Jordan. Not only did Trump almost certainly break the law, but his co-conspirator and former lawyer, Michael Cohen, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for this crime. Oh, this is a good point. Let me read through it and then I'll say why. But the larger issue here is that Jordan is doing this in the midst of Trump doing everything he can to instigate violence against Bragg. He called Bragg, who is black, by the way, a racist Soros-backed DA who lets murderers, rapists, and drug dealers walk free, and repeatedly falsely accused Bragg of being corrupt and on the take. The main impact of forcing Bragg to testify in a kangaroo hearing would be to spread his photo even further in the MAGA world, making him an even bigger target. Jordan and the other Republicans no doubt know they're endangering Bragg's safety, but they simply don't care. It cannot be stated enough, these Republicans are winking at and excusing violence on behalf of a man who nearly got them killed by sending a violent mob after them on January 6th. They know he's chaotic and sociopathic and would sacrifice any one of them if he thought it would get him more power. Hell, he'd probably trade any of their lives for a free burger at McDonald's. That's a good one. But since they're also convinced their own route to power goes through Trump, they will empower him to get away with crimes, even if he tries to use violence to escape accountability. All right. That's the end of the article. The point I wanted to go back to, though, was where? Here we go. Oh, yes, right. The gaslight being thick, as usual with Jordan. Not only did Trump almost certainly break the law, but his co-conspirator and former lawyer Michael Cohen was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his crime. Two things. I've had it questioned. They're asking the question all over the place. Everywhere I go, people are asking this question. Is this really a crime? Is it really a crime to pay someone just, to say, here's a couple $100,000. Just be quiet about the thing that we did, which wasn't a crime in itself. We had some sex. Just shut up about it. Here's $130,000. Is it a crime? Usually no, not by itself. But the problem is that it's tangled up in a number of other things that do perhaps constitute crimes. There's, of course, the campaign finance violation, and people say, does that really matter? Well, for one thing, just because it's white-collar crime doesn't mean it's not crime. There is that. But even weirder, I think, is the reminder that Michael Cohen, if it's not a crime, why did Michael Cohen spend time in jail for it, right? Remember, what he did here was try to disguise the hush money payment as something else. He basically, he took out the loan, whatever. He gives the money to Stormy Daniels through various mechanisms and then tells the Trump organization, you need to pay me $130,000 for legal work. So there's a fraudulent filing here. He's trying to cover it up and call it legal work and get paid. So it's fraud and it's akin to money laundering, and he went to jail for it. If he went to jail, shouldn't the person who paid him go too? Whoop, there we go. Okay, come on, button. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Struggling with the Button show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, anyway, in case we didn't make it all the way in there before the actual break kicked in, there is the issue of Michael Cohen having served time for all of this. He fraudulently billed the Trump organization for work that he said was legal representation when it was in fact the payment of this hush money bribe. And in all likelihood, and I guess that's up to Alvin Bragg to try to prove it at some point, Donald Trump knew exactly what, and the Trump organization knew exactly what they were doing, what they were paying for. They participated willingly in this fraud, and that fraud sent Michael Cohen to jail. It should send the people who agreed to participate in the fraud to jail as well. And what's really interesting is that it appears to be the aim of Trump and the Trump organization and everybody else to say, well, we shouldn't be convicted for this fraud because, after all, the establishment of the fraud depends on, in part anyway, the testimony of Michael Cohen. And after all, you don't want to listen to Michael Cohen. He's a liar. He's a proven liar, a guy who was involved in fraud and had to even go to jail because of how bad his fraud was. How can you believe this guy when he testifies against me? He's a fraudster. You don't want to listen to a guy who was so bad at fraud that he went to jail. You want to listen to a guy like me who's so good at fraud that he stays out of jail, right? But think about how gaslighty that actually is. He's lying. He's a liar. He always is involved in fraud. You can't believe him. Well, what fraud is it that we're saying warrants not believing him? And it is, in fact, that he was telling the truth about having perpetrated a fraud for you. and he went to jail perpetrating this fraud for you, and you have not gone to jail, and you try to stay out of jail by saying, you can't believe that guy, he's involved in fraud. He was involved in your fraud. So at some point, even if you don't believe that there was a serious crime involved, and there apparently was one, but even if you don't believe that the underlying issue is enough to send him to jail, I mean, you should just send him to jail just for the gall of this gaslighting alone should be enough, I think. Okay, well, let's see. I've got some other things here to get onto, but anyway, as usual, interesting perspective from Amanda Marcotte. I'm glad we got a chance to look it over. And what else? I'm taking a look at something else here that was sent to me yesterday. I think Greg forwarded this. What's going on here? An indictment of Donald Trump by a grand jury is expected late Monday or Wednesday. Interesting. What? You don't want to have it on Tuesday here? According to 3 people involved in the deliberations, but Marissa Cabas is saying here, they just don't want to give him the satisfaction of being right, and I respect that level of petty. Is that what's going on here? Because does that mean that the indictment was going to be either Monday or Wednesday because Donald Trump said it was going to be Tuesday, so they're going to move it to another day? Okay, well, that would be kind of funny. Anyway, let's see. Many other stories, as I mentioned, that I wanted to get to, but I think that was, that's probably covers it in terms of the reasons to think of this thing as a serious enough underlying crime that they really should go forward with it. If nothing else, they should go forward with it just because Michael Cohen went to jail for it, and it was all perpetrated for Trump. And the idea that Cohen should be the only one to serve time for it is a little weird all by itself. Not that I need to vindicate Michael Cohen in any way. All right, let's see other stories that that we thought we should share with you. This is, which direction can we go next? There are so many. I guess related to this case, let me add this one. I just thought this was an interesting thing to come up. How did we get this one? Was it, again, Judd Legum, whose work we discussed yesterday. Greg brought up, Judd's explanation for why the Stormy Daniels story matters. And anybody with more questions still, I would refer to his recounting of things. But this was an interesting sort of side note to all this. Judd is, this morning, tooting on Mastodon. You know who else argued that Trump's actions were potentially a serious offense? You might not believe this, but it's in all caps, so you have to believe it. The lawyer currently representing Trump. What? Yes. Well, by way of reference, the Twitter account of Acyn, A-C-Y-N, who's always got the video clips for evidence that you need in order to make these claims. Let's see. I'll have to bring this up in Pocket on the big show-running computer. So, oh boy, do I have to log in? All right, let's see if this will work. Hope everything is on the up and up here. Otherwise, we're going to have to rig something up with the microphones. Yeah, here we go. Got to scroll down to Judd. Was this the one here? Yeah, here. So here's the Acyn clip. Let's bring up the original, and then we got to play with the volume knobs and everything to make sure that you can hear this. But this is, I guess, does it say when this happened? Is there a date visible in the clip? I don't think so. But 48 seconds worth of craziness, in which I guess is this Trump's lawyer right now in the Stormy Daniels situation? What's his name here? Joe Tacopina. I'm just not close enough to the story to recognize off the bat, but I guess I'll believe him. Here he is on CNN at some point, God only knows when. It's like 3 a.m. whenever this clip is from. 2018. There's at least a year attached to this, according to Acyn's tweet about it. So back in 2018, Joe Tacopina, or however you pronounce it, is on CNN being interviewed about this story. Could Stormy Daniels impact the Russia investigation? That is the Chiron's question back in 2018. And let's turn up the volume and see what he has to say about this in 2018. Weird.
Ukraine, I mean, once that net is out, once the microscope is on you, everything is fair game. And it's hard to argue, oh, you can't look at this or you can't look at that. So, yes, if there's an issue with that payment to Stormy Daniels being that it was made on behalf of the candidate, okay, and it was not declared, that's fair game, unfortunately, if that's the case. And, quite frankly, Michael Cohen, again, has made statements that would give rise to suspicion for any prosecutor to say, that doesn't make sense, that a lawyer took out a home equity loan with his own money, paid somebody that he didn't even know on behalf of a client who, by the way, had the wherewithal and the money to afford $130,000. Yeah. And, by the way, didn't tell the client about the settlement agreement. It's an illegal agreement. It's a fraud, if that's, in fact, the case. Ukraine. Yeah,
that's okay. So that's a pretty good rundown of why it was a fraud for Michael Cohen to have done this. And, of course, the flip side of that, even at the time, we knew, well, obviously the Trump organization and Trump himself are agreeing to perpetrate this fraud. But a good reminder, it's all the more remarkable that it is a reminder being offered to us by, at the time, legal commentator Joe Tacopina, or however you pronounce his last name. And then that guy would then be hired by Trump to handle this case. I don't know how that came about. He looks like he's calling it, he's in the studio in Stamford, Connecticut. So he's, I guess, a New York area guy. I guess he's a pretty sharp attorney. And I don't know whether he made mention to Trump at the outset of their relationship. Hey, I've been on TV talking about the opposite side of this before. Maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's attractive to Trump somehow. Only I can fix it in an I can fix it sort of way. I know the argument that will put you away, so I can disarm the argument that will put you away. But anyway, it's not worth much in court or anything. It's just sort of an interesting observation and, worth sharing. And so, that's what I've done with it. All right. Anyway, other things to tell you about. There's an awful lot, like I mentioned. Let's see. Where do we want to turn next? How about this? Here's a story that I picked up via Politico, whether from Twitter or Mastodon, I can't recall, but procedural story, always of interest to us here. Politico, who's writing this one? Burgess Everett, longtime reporter on Hill Matters at Politico. I don't remember. Did he get his start maybe at the Hill or one of those papers? Anyway, he's at Politico now, and maybe has been for years. I can't remember. Here's the story. Senate absences multiply headaches for both parties. Subheader tells the real story here. The last time that all 100 members of the Senate attended a vote was August 7th. It's taking a toll on day-to-day business very frequently. I mean, there's almost always absences in the Senate. It's actually a relative rarity that all 100 members of the Senate show up to cast a vote on anything, certainly anything that's routine, highly controversial bills or appointments, etc. Those things might draw all 100 when it's important to be, seen as being on the record on such and such a vote. But ordinarily, there are a few people absent for whatever reason. But with COVID still in circulation, and of course, just the nature of the Senate, that there's elderly people in the Senate. There's going to be a lot of absences. And this one is illustrated with a photo of Mitch McConnell with a caption that reads, "It's still not clear when senators can expect the return of either 81-year-old Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who is recovering from a concussion." And I guess that's a sentence that they must have edited along the way, because who else are they thinking about? Why either? I don't know. Maybe the story will tell that tale later on. It's still not clear when senators can expect the return of 81-year-old Senate Majority Leader. Anyway, remember, of course, he fell and suffered a concussion and other injuries. So it'll take him a while to get back there. And remember, you'll be reminded by the story, as a matter of fact. I might as well just go ahead. That they don't allow for proxy voting or remote participation in the Senate the way they once did in the House. But of course, Republicans have done away with that even in the House, and it's I'm sure it's troubled them with their very narrow majority from time to time. But now it's a big deal in the Senate. The last time all 100 senators were on the floor voting together was more than 7 months ago, and it's starting to take a toll on both parties because their majorities, even when they were Republican majorities, have been narrow all the time. This Congress features one of history's oldest Senates, a fact that's fueled ongoing debate about gerontocracy in government. Yet it's not just age keeping one member, and sometimes 6 or more from the floor, blame a confluence of illness, family matters, and impending retirements dating well into last year. Just last week, 5 senators missed every vote held that week, with several out for extended absences, and it doesn't look like all 100 senators will be back this week. It's not an idle matter either. Both parties' attendance issues are affecting Senate business, from crucial floor votes to the mundane business of committee hearings. The Senate last had all 100 members in attendance on August 7th when Democrats passed their party line energy, healthcare, and tax bill. There's all kinds of occupations in this country where people have to be absent because of health. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, of course, said, a senator's no different from a John Deere worker or a professor at a university. If you're sick, you're sick. Grassley, who prides himself on his attendance record, is recovering from hip surgery, but has not missed any votes since he had coronavirus in late 2020. How about that? Over the past 2 months, he's progressed from a wheelchair to a cane as he returns from the procedure. Asked how he's feeling, he replied, "Let me answer your question this way. Assume hip dead." He tweeted it. No, he said, then he carefully demonstrated that he doesn't actually need a cane to walk. So I guess he's making progress. Well, on a personal level, good for him, I suppose. It's still not clear when senators can expect the return of, here we are, either 81-year-old Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who is recovering from a concussion, or the 53-year-old Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, who is receiving treatment for depression, and 89-year-old Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is battling shingles at the moment on top of everything else, probably won't be back this week, according to a person familiar with her plans. Feinstein's absence from her perch on the Judiciary Committee is an acute Democratic concern. The party is trying to move judicial nominees out of committee to the floor, but have postponed panel votes during her absence. That's actually quite a major inconvenience. Now that you mention it, among the delayed nominees is First Circuit Court nominee Michael Delaney, who has faced criticism over his handling of a school sexual assault case. "I'm anxious because I can't really have a markup of new judge nominees until she's there," said Senator Dick Durbin, the party's number 2 and Senate Judiciary Committee chair. Durbin announced Sunday that he had tested positive for coronavirus himself and would quarantine, adding another absence in case you too still thought that for some reason that coronavirus was over. No. It's unclear if Delaney can get through the committee even with Feinstein in attendance, though other nominees have bipartisan support and might be able to move even with a Democratic absence. And the full Senate can still confirm judges with a simple majority, which these days sometimes involves the tie-breaking vote of Vice President Kamala Harris. In a statement for this article, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said, "We've always worked through attendance issues and will still be able to confirm a record number of judges and pass legislation." McConnell's concussion injury and his subsequent therapy have also affected the Senate's day-to-day, as well as the GOP's internal operations. A little bit of an awkward sentence there, but Republicans want to peel back President Joe Biden's water environmental regulations, but last week's vote was delayed because McConnell, number 3 Senate Republican John Barrasso, and Senator Ted Cruz all missed votes. Cruz is expected back this week, according to an aide. That's too bad. Republicans have several other regulatory rollbacks they want to spring on the majority party, but with a 51-49 Democratic majority, attendance can play a major factor in whether or not a vote succeeds. GOP senators hope to make progress on those this week. Senator Rand Paul said he hoped McConnell would return this week, but he had not spoken directly with the GOP leader. A person familiar with the situation said, the decision will be made by the leader's physicians and therapists. It's common for this type of something to shift in the middle of my reading it because of pop-up ads. It's common for this type of therapy, here we are, to last anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. Okay, that's not a huge range, but all right. Senator John Thune, the GOP whip, is helping run the conference in consultation with McConnell's top aides in the minority leader's stead. Thune partially blamed the lax attendance on some senators not considering the Senate's recent schedule a must-attend affair. The agenda lately has mostly consisted of disapproval votes of Biden administration or D.C. Council policies, nominees, and rolling back the Iraq military authorization, a move with significant GOP support, by the way. People may feel a bit more flexibility than they would if we were doing really consequential legislating right now. It's an interesting dismissal of what they're working on. Then you've got folks who have just serious either health or family health issues, and I think you got to respect that, Thune said. Plainly speaking, it's been an atypical 3-year run in the chamber. The COVID pandemic caused regular absences. The 50-50 Senate consistently churned out down-to-the-wire votes, and 2 Democratic senators experienced and recovered from strokes last year. So far, no one has endured an absence like that of former Senators Mark Kirk, Republican of Illinois, and Tim Johnson, Democrat of South Dakota, who each spent months away after suffering, respectively, a stroke and brain hemorrhage. I guess, you could go further back in history, but whatever. On the Democratic side, some lawmakers are working closely with Fetterman's staff to help the first-term senator still have an impact. Senator Peter Welch of Vermont asked questions at a Senate Agriculture Committee hearing on Fetterman's behalf last week and said in an interview he's consulting with Fetterman's chief of staff. Anything I can do to help my colleague. Senator Bob Casey is also working with Fetterman's staff to help with constituent requests and potential legislation like their bipartisan rail safety bill. Casey said he intentionally is not dialing up Fetterman because he doesn't want to impede Fetterman's recovery with missed calls. He's able to take the time he needs to get the help that he needs, and he'll be back soon, Casey said. Casey himself missed a few days of Senate business in February after prostate cancer surgery, but he's been back for several weeks. These days, he sounds like he's ready to announce his re-election plans. I'll be able to address that soon, he says, and that 2024 Senate map hangs over everything, with Democrats gearing up to protect their slim majority yet again next year in a tough cycle. Some downtime is built into the chamber's schedule for campaign activities. The Senate's been in recess for a total of nearly 4 weeks so far this year, and there's an upcoming 2-week Easter recess in April. And while senators typically fly in on Monday nights and work until Thursday afternoons, they've pushed their arrivals to Tuesday, both this week and last. For me, the rhythm has been disrupted more by the short weeks, says Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He attributed the quirky schedule to the folks who are in cycle. That is, of course, to say election cycle, unless, of course, they are high school athletes in Florida, where they would be talking, of course, about their menstrual cycles, even as, by the way, Florida seeks to ban students from discussing their menstrual cycles at all, and it's a forbidden topic in school, while at the same time a required topic in school when they need to perhaps punish some trans people. So you're not allowed to talk about your menstrual cycle, but we are able to force you to talk about it, even though you're not allowed to bring it up of your own volition. How interesting is that? Well, depends on how you view things. But okay. Just thought I might throw a mention of that in there today. Since it's such a weird collection of stories today, we should remind everybody about that. All right, let's see. Speaking of which, whatever it might be that we were speaking of. Here's another Slate take from another expert in seeing odd and interesting and sometimes unexplored angles from the same publication. This time not Amanda Marcotte, but Dahlia Lithwick, who writes this, or has this interesting take. We are all fetuses now. I don't feel like a fetus, but let's find out why you might say such a thing. The tactic, she says, deployed to protect, quote unquote, protect the unborn, has now been deployed to deprive actual living, breathing, ambulating humans of agency too. What does she mean? Well, let's get right to it. It's become axiomatic, she says, in our political discourse that one of the reasons the anti-abortion crowd became so powerfully persuasive in the decades after Roe is that claiming to speak for a fetus is rhetorically unassailable. If every fertilized egg is human life, nobody can claim to understand its preferences and hopes and dreams, so substituting the voice of the movement is a simple matter. All fertilized eggs want to live and thrive, goes the theory. End of policy debate. This is why, as Barney Frank famously puts it, quote, these people believe that life begins at conception and ends at birth. It's why the quote from Dave Barnhart that went viral right before Roe was overturned is still so perfectly apt. As the pastor put it, and I must say, I don't recall this going viral, and it's too long to be considered viral. I mean, compared to Barney Frank's quip, it's like, War and Peace here. Look at this. It's a whole paragraph. But here it is, Dave Barnhart saying, the unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated. Unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or chronically poor, they don't resent your condescension or complain that you are not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they are born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth, power, or privilege, without reimagining social structures, apologizing, or making reparations to anyone. They are, in short, the perfect people to love if you want to claim you love Jesus, but actually dislike people who breathe. Prisoners, immigrants, the sick, the poor, widows, orphans, all the groups that are specifically mentioned in the Bible, they all get thrown under the bus for the unborn. The emptiness of this interest in life is also why so many anti-abortion politicians mouthed platitudes after Dobbs about their increased focus on poverty, food insecurity, and maternal and child health, and why very little of this is actually materialized. But what many of us have missed is that the tactic of protecting the voiceless, innocent unborn has now been deployed to deprive actual living, breathing, ambulating humans of moral agency as well. It's the tactic being used to ban books, to silence teachers, to go after drag performances, to deny health care to families seeking to support trans kids. The notion that everyone must be protected from a scourge of immorality is in some ways old wine in a new bottle. But it is also a creeping form of illiberalism that ensures that for some GOP politicians, we all remain fetuses forever. It was, of course, never even true that pro-lifers could speak for all fetuses. As we are increasingly being made aware, wanted fetuses can become children with lives so difficult that it is unclear they really did want to be alive. Wanted fetuses can become medical emergencies for mothers who might not be prepared to sacrifice their own lives for the chance of a fetus's life, or even when there is no chance, for that matter. There has been shockingly little attention paid to these facts and scenarios, which are always complicated and frequently heartbreaking. But as we hear Republican politicians gunning to hide books about race from children in Florida, or deny gender-affirming care to trans families, or ban drag shows, their rationale continues to be that everyone is a baby. Teenagers are now de facto babies, but lately, so are their parents. Here's an example. In Georgia this week, voting to ban gender-affirming care for anyone under 18, Republican Representative Josh Bonner said this: "As parents, our role is to help our kids navigate through the confusion of growing up in a society that is often over-sexualized and wants to place children in situations to make adult decisions they are not capable of making. Under this construction of the case, it's not just teens, but also their parents who are the children, who cannot even be trusted to make decisions about how to make decisions themselves." That is an interesting point. Very true, and they just basically cover everyone with the same sheet and say, "We'll take care of it. No agency for you. Decisions will be made by the legislature, top down."
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As I was reading through this last paragraph or two and reading about the Florida book bans and hiding all books that talk about race in any way, shape, or form, I was reminded of something that came across the Mastodon transom, which is not alliterative the same way Twitter transom is, so a little harder to remember. Anyway, saw this piece, 5 days ago. It says, I thought this was kind of interesting, and I think it was Waldo Jackwith who had passed this thing on. Let me see if I can find the original here and open it up. I just thought that was interesting. Here, he says, is the story of Rosa Parks as told in Florida's proposed new elementary school textbooks after being edited by the state's anti-woke textbook review board. And basically the story is reduced to this. A woman was told by nobody in particular to switch seats on a bus for no particular reason, but she said nah, and that's the end of that. This according to the reporting of the New York Times in the article from, March 16th under the title of Florida Scoured Math Textbooks for Prohibited Topics. Next up, social studies. Behind the scene, one publisher went to great lengths to avoid mentions of race, even in the story of Rosa Parks. And here's the blurb on Rosa Parks, by the way, which just, let's see. Is this the old version versus the new version? Is that what's happening here? I think so. I guess the old version said, Rosa Parks, in 1955, Rosa Parks broke the law. This is one of those little infographics in the book. It's not necessarily the narrative of the story that appears in the body of the book, but it says here, in 1955, Rosa Parks broke the law In her city, the law said African Americans had to give up their seats on the bus if a white person wanted to sit down. She would not give up her seat. The police came and took her to jail. That's a little more sensible a recitation of what happened here. But the new version, after the Florida Anti-Woke Textbook Review Board got a hold of it, reads, Rosa Parks showed courage. One day, she rode the bus. She was told to move to a different seat. She did not. She did what she believed was right. And that's the story of Rosa Parks. As Waldo points out, she's a woman that, you don't know what color she is. She was told by nobody in particular to switch seats for no particular reason, but she said, nah, and that's it. And, history, boom, like, that we should write this down. Someone was asked to move seats and didn't. It's a historic moment. Well, in context, yes, it is. With no context, not really. Actually, not much of a lesson. Can't really help kids learn anything about history or civil rights or any of it. It doesn't matter. It's a story about bravery. Why was she brave? Because she was asked to move seats and didn't. She did what she thought was right. I'm sitting here already. I mean, there's nothing you can take away. You can't understand this. If you don't know the story already, you'll come away with the belief that doing what you think is right involves saying, I'm already sitting. No, I don't want to move to a different seat. Wow, she showed courage. There's not even a mention of police in here. It's really rather remarkable. And a good reminder that, as I like to tell people, remind them that Ron DeSantis got himself a Yale education by playing baseball, by the way. I mean, it's not a bad way to get yourself an education. But so he got himself a Yale education. But now he's using his Yale education to make sure that nobody else gets a chance at an education. You can't have one. I already got mine. You need to remain ignorant. The more you learn about history, the more you'll realize I'm a terrible person and want to get rid of me. We can't have any of that. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because that was, I thought, a true absurdity, the Rosa Parks recitation there. So yeah, when we make mention of Republican politicians in Florida gunning to hide books about race from children, right? That's what we're talking about. Even in books that aren't about race, if there's a mention of race, they got to scrub it such that the story no longer makes any sense whatsoever. I think that's the key part of all of this. All right. So, but we're back now to Dahlia Lithwick arguing that we're all fetuses now, thanks to where Republican politicians stand in all of this, especially in Florida. Even though actually the Republican she quotes here is from Georgia. So, but I emphasize the Florida part of it because I'm going on 10 different tangents here, but another thing that I have parked here in pocket is the toot from Barney at one of the Mastodon servers at there. What is it? mas.to. Masto, I don't know what you call it for short. Anyway, pointing out this very interesting story, which I'll just give you the toot about. There's a link to an article explaining the whole thing, but the commentary is what I'm after here. Something, Barney says, is very wrong here. A Florida Supreme Court justice just abruptly retired only 4 months after he ran for another term and won. That does seem odd, right? This allows DeSantis to appoint his replacement. DeSantis will have appointed 5 of Florida's 7 Supreme Court justices. He's taking nearly complete control of all 3 branches of Florida's government. The legislature very much in his thrall, as others have pointed out. But now the Supreme Court as well. That seems kind of weird. The headline here is 15-year Justice Polston resigns, giving DeSantis a 7th pick for the court out of a 7th pick. But I guess currently 5 of the 7 were appointed by him. But I guess maybe he's made other picks in the past, and they have not stuck around in the court for one reason or another. But you can read the whole story at Flagler Live, a link to which is provided here, although because it's so difficult sometimes to pass on the links via Mastodon, I'll open up the story here so I can pass you the link to the actual article itself if you'd like to read that. All right, now back to the We're All Fetuses Now recitation from Dahlia Lithwick, who now takes us back to Florida after discussing things in Georgia. In Florida this week, defending his deliberately confusing and chaos-ridden program, or if you read it quickly enough, pogrom, of book bans in schools, Governor Ron DeSantis said this: I just think parents, when they're sending their kids to school, they should not have to worry about this garbage being in the schools. And that I think, though, that there is a concerted effort to bring some of this sexualization into the classroom, particularly in these young grades. But of course, the lists of books that have been removed from classrooms and libraries are not limited to, quote, porn and filth, as PEN America has meticulously detailed. Then parenthetically it reads, HB 1467, the bill in Florida, mandates that any library or instructional book must be reviewed by a district employee with a valid educational media specialist certificate to make sure that they don't contain porn or the fact that racism exists. As a result, Florida textbooks are being edited so that someday school children may be spared the sentence, explaining Rosa Parks, that, quote, African Americans had to give up their seats on the bus if a white person wanted to sit down, in favor of the sentence, she was told to move to a different seat. We are all the innocent unborn, deeply in need of protection now. That's interesting because I didn't know that Dahlia Lithwick actually had seen that switch made. I just thought it was important and would help add context to things, so I added it myself. But Dahlia was on the ball and on top of it all along. I just didn't know it. I never trust anybody to do these things. Anyway, getting from parental rights to book bans means deploying, again, the meaningless language of grooming and Marxism and CRT and the sexualization of teenagers, which, by the way, there's nothing you can do to avoid, that reduces both them and the parents who choose to send them to public school to fetuses with no moral agency to think or speak for themselves. Joan Walsh recently quoted the leader of a group called No Left Turn in Education, who disrupted a Clay County school board meeting last summer in his efforts to get the memoir Lucky by Alice Sebold banned because of its rape scene. His rationale? They are trying to sexualize and normalize deviant behavior, he told reporters. Sexualizing our children is grooming. It is not acceptable. It is illegal. The book, in fact, does the opposite of normalizing deviant behavior. Same story with the drag show bans sweeping the country. As the Texas Tribune recently reported, most opposition to drag events has been driven by anti-LGBTQ groups that deliberately mischaracterize them as efforts to groom and harm children. A quote here that reads, the Texas Tribune reviewed more than 24 anti-drag incidents, including protests and online harassment campaigns that have occurred in the state since the beginning of Pride Month last June. Taken together, they show how a small but influential cadre of activists and extremist groups have fueled anti-drag panic by routinely characterizing all drag as inherently and nefariously sexual, regardless of the content or the audience. Those claims have been then used to justify harassment and legislation targeting the LGBTQ community as a whole, often under the guise of protecting kids. At least a quarter of the anti-drag incidents have been directed at events that organizers say are not even remotely sexual. Drag queen story hours, where performers read children's books, often at a library or bookstore, in an effort to promote literacy. Prominent anti-drag figures have made it clear that they think drag is obscene regardless of the context. Live human children, back to Dahlia's commentary here, who have functioning human parents who either choose to take them to these events or do not, are being, quote, protected here from being the ones to make decisions about their own lives. The opponents, who insert themselves into protected free speech activity, by the way, have erased the moral will and decision-making choices of any player in this drama, have reduced them to nothing, zygotes and fluid. Their clarion calls for parents' rights now exclude parents. Who is being treated like a fetus now? That is interesting. Well, you've got to listen to the parents. Yeah, parents' rights. The parents say, I want to take my kids to this event. They say, well, you shouldn't have the right to do that because you obviously don't know what you're talking about. Don't listen to parents, or at least don't listen to those parents. Listen to these parents over here. Once you are introducing policies that regard both teenagers and their adult parents as incapable of reasoned decision-making, you are committing the very same ethical fallacy for which Barnhart called out pro-lifers. You are claiming to love American teenagers and their parents, and you are advocating for them without substantially challenging your own wealth, power, or privilege, without reimagining social structures, apologizing, or making reparations to anyone. We are all fetuses now. American teens, and increasingly their grown parents, have become, as Barnhart so aptly put it, the perfect people to love if you want to claim you love Jesus, but actually dislike people who breathe. It's an interesting approach to the issue. I don't know if it's going to resonate with everybody, but I certainly get the point. And, the one that scored the most with me is right at the end where they say, of course, as Glenn Youngkin did, how was I going to say it? As Glenn Youngkin did over and over again. I had a much more interesting word for it. Incessantly, I think was what I was going to say. Trust parents, believe in parents. You got to listen to parents, give parents a say in their kids' education. Unless, of course, the parents say it's okay to listen to a story read by a drag queen, in which case, oh my God, take the children away. It's got to be stopped. Suddenly we don't trust those parents anymore. And, they'll look you right in the eye and say, yeah, of course not, because they're abusive when they take their kids away. Everyone knows all drag is grooming. Well, no, that's not true, and that's the problem. And that's why you can't figure this out logically. All drag is not grooming. All drag is not sexual. All drag is not anything at all. It just as all anything isn't anything in particular. Well, okay, all squares are rhombuses or whatever the hell the old adage was. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about here. But yeah, they just say, well, because I believe this incorrect thing about the nature of drag, therefore you can have no rights anymore. Well, if that makes sense in your world, there's really not much you can do, but beat them where it counts. Of course, at the polls. That's what we're talking about. Okay. Let's see other stories to get to. Let's see some of these things I have to open up again to see whether we've treated them or not because they're Mastodon links. Here's a wild one. Judd Legum making an appearance in the lineup again today. He's just commenting on someone else's Twitter comment here. But his comment is, this guy really compared Marjorie Taylor Greene, murdery traitor, to LeBron. Yeah, LeBron James. How so? James Comer, chairman of the Oversight and Accountability Committee, concedes he can't control GOP star colleagues like murdery traitor Greene. Why not? The message, he says, is it's hard for a coach to tell LeBron James what he's doing wrong. He said that in the New York Times piece herein linked. Comer, Republicans investigative chief embraces role of Biden antagonist. The fourth-term Kentuckian and chairman of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee has become an aggressive promoter of sinister-sounding claims about the president and his family. And I guess the point is being made that he's doing so under the influence of murdery traitor Greene, who's driving policy everywhere you look in the Republican House. And his excuse for it is, well, it's hard for the coach to tell LeBron what he's doing wrong. But LeBron's good at what he does, and murdery traitor Greene is awful. So, yeah, it's a bit of a weird comparison, to say the least. But I put that away, but I don't know that we're going to need to read the entirety of that article. Let's see. Have we gotten to other things that are in here that might not, that are important, but haven't been read yet or are somehow disguised. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, eclectic things to get to. Maybe we throw this one in here. I don't know anything about this source, but just because it's worth keeping an eye on all crazy Russian things, I thought I might mention to you. This comes from Meduza, Meduza.io. I don't know anything about what we're looking at here, who it is, what it is. Maybe I can get some clue about this here. I'm not really sure, but I guess they are a self-styled Russia watchdog of some kind, and they build themselves up at the top here. The Kremlin doesn't want Meduza to spread the truth. Don't let them win. I don't know. Maybe they, don't know anything about it, but this is the story that they're featuring. I just thought I'd at least mention this. I guess it is sourced from what is supposed to be Dmitry Medvedev himself speaking on Telegram, the right-leaning Twitter alternative that doesn't matter out there again, like the rest of them. But okay, here's the story. Dmitry Medvedev threatens to launch missile strike. That sounds normal. They usually do that all the time. But on who? On the International Criminal Court, the ICC, in response to war crimes warrant against Putin. We haven't really discussed the fact that the International Criminal Court, I guess, said, yeah, there's reason to believe that it might be valid to charge Vladimir Putin with war crimes for at least, some of the activities undertaken in the name of the invasion of Ukraine. And what an interesting response this is. Russian Security Council Deputy Chair Dmitry Medvedev lashed out at the International Criminal Court on Monday, warning on Telegram that Russia might respond to the body's decision to issue an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin by launching a missile strike on its building in The Hague, Den Haag, in, I guess, the probably mispronounced local vernacular. The ICC judges got all worked up in vain. Look, they said, we're brave. We're not too chicken bleep, let's say, to raise a hand against the largest nuclear power. Alas, gentlemen, everyone walks under God and rockets. That's quite a quote, actually. I don't know if he borrowed it from somebody else. It's not hard to imagine the targeted use of a hypersonic Onyx from the North Sea from a Russian ship on the Hague courthouse, wrote Medvedev. In fact, it actually is hard to imagine the targeted use of a hypersonic missile from the North Sea. It's not hard to understand the physics of how it might happen. It's just hard to believe that even the Russians could be so crazy. But I mean, that's what makes this an important and interesting news bit. Medvedev's not just nobody, and tweeting out that we might bomb The Hague rather than simply, what they really will do is ignore the charges. What is it? An indictment? Arrest warrant? Doesn't mean much unless Vladimir Putin puts himself in harm's way, so to speak. And I mean, it's bad news for him. I'm sure that as a purported world leader, he can't travel to certain Western countries lest he face arrest and extradition. That's inconvenient, no doubt, but I think he was kind of, ready for that at this point. So, nobody's going to execute the arrest warrant against him unless he puts himself out there to be arrested. So there's really no reason to do this. So, but for them to lash out with a missile strike, or even really honestly just to say out loud, one of the things we could do is not only ignore the arrest warrant, but bomb The Hague. Okay, it's interesting that you feel willing to do and say something like that. The ICC, the article goes on to say, issued the warrant for Putin's arrest on Friday, March 17th. St. Patrick's Day. The formal cause for the warrant is Putin's alleged complicity in the illegal deportations of children from Ukraine's occupied territories to Russia. That is a fairly serious charge. The court also issued an arrest warrant against Russian Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for her alleged role in the same crimes. Okay. Something we haven't talked a great deal about, but has received some mention on the show. It's been some time since we talked about it. But the arrest warrant, I mean, that too is a fairly splashy thing for the ICC to have done. But yes, I mean, they do kind of operate under the cover of, nobody's going to bomb us because we're just kind of too high profile. The world would be too appalled by such an attack to, idly stand by. But Medvedev may have a point here in that, when push comes to shove, what do we expect to be done? Like, what if they did just outright bomb the ICC court building in The Hague? Like, everybody would be aghast. There would be calls. There has to be some sort of retaliation, but what exactly would it be? Like, what do you do? What do you bomb in retaliation? Or is sanctions really, does that really mean anything in the face of actually bombing the World Court? I don't know. So he may have identified another one of those weaknesses at the seams here. Like, there's not going to be international agreement on how to respond to something like that. I think he might be right about that. That's pretty wild. So I don't know. I just thought maybe we ought to take note of that at some level, even if we don't obsess over it from here on in. Okay. Let's see. Other things to, here's an Associated Press report on the warrant itself, but I think we kind of have the background we need from that. Let's see. Gosh, there's a lot, and some of these things are pretty long, and we can't get to it. I'll keep it on the short side, even though there are major stories looming. Maybe sometime later in the week we have to get back to the long reads, the questions about the sabotaging of the Carter administration's efforts to get the hostages freed still needs further reading and further discussion. The 20th anniversary of the launch of the Iraq War has caused a lot of hand-wringing and looking back, and all the attendant weirdness that goes with it for newspapers that were essentially sold on the war, or some people would describe as having been cheerleaders for the war, and others same people would describe as having been wrong about it, look back and acknowledge some of the wrongness, but it's mostly like reporting about the following people, not including us, were wrong about the war. Right. And the headline over the New York Times, 20 years on, a question, don't know which one, but a question lingers about Iraq. Why did the U.S. invade? And they make a good point up front. I mean, it sort of obfuscates some of the points that ought to be made about it, but that we may never know, but that we very often rarely, or I should say, we very often know, or that rarely do we know. We can't say very often rarely know. It doesn't make much sense. The absolute truth about what caused a war, there's lots of what caused the Civil War. People argue about that. What caused the United States to become involved in World War I? What sparked World War I among the European powers? It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Do we know for sure? But there are generally accepted explanations that fit in one-line infographics in textbooks. And will there ever be one for the Iraq War? We don't know. All right. So other short items that I could squeeze in. Here's an interesting story that fits nowhere else, so therefore maybe a good item to wrap up today's collection. Scott's going to love this one. This has 1 million links. AP News reporting, thanks to Michael Casey, new college, that is to say the one in Florida, new college transfer students invited by like-minded campus. This might be a nice alternative if you felt bad about the poor kids in the middle of DeSantis's crusade down there. It's Dateline Boston, because I guess that's where it's happening. A small liberal arts college in Massachusetts is rolling out the welcome mat for students from a Florida school that had been taken over by conservatives picked by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. It's Hampshire College in Amherst, which this month announced that any students in good standing from New College of Florida can transfer there to Hampshire College, and with the help of some student aid, pay the same amount in tuition that they are paying in Florida. So that might be of real help there for those kids. That could be fantastic. The two academic institutions each are known for progressive, free-spirited students, a lack of traditional grades, and opportunities for students to design their own course of study. Just the sorts of things that are likely to get conservatives mad because people are succeeding in non-traditional ways. Oh no. Hampshire President Edward Wingenbach said it wanted to show solidarity with new college students. It's incredibly important that colleges and universities do something to try to resist what is essentially an ongoing, expanding, and increasingly aggressive effort to limit free inquiry in higher education. Remember when that was like actually their subject and Republicans and conservatives were saying that that's what they were all about? Anyway, we have to see that for what it is and try to do what's within our resources and capabilities to push back on that. One of the things Hampshire can do is offer students at New College a place to go and escape that. New College is a state school of fewer than 1,000 students nestled along Sarasota Bay. Makes it sound very nice. That has been known as a haven for marginalized students, especially from the LGBTQ community. DeSantis recently loaded the Board of Trustees with his choices as part of an effort to shift Florida's state-funded institutions of higher learning to a more conservative direction. A spokesperson for Hampshire, Jennifer Chrysler, said the school had received 15 emails and 4 voicemails from New College students inquiring about its matching tuition program. So far, they have had 1 student transfer in advance of the matching tuition program. 4 others have since applied. A spokesman for the Florida State Department of Education did not respond to a request for comment. Hampshire College is working to bounce back from an enrollment slide that left it on the verge of closure in 2019. As of this year, the campus had fewer than 500 students, down from 1,500 several years ago. So it's among Massachusetts' many small colleges that have struggled to attract students in recent years, forcing several to close their doors for good. So maybe this mutual self-help involved in all this, an interesting idea. Hope it works out for all involved.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, of course. Let's see, he starts off with, no one has to worry about a violent Trump mob invading Manhattan. That's good news. Out in L.A., schools will close as district workers begin a 3-day strike. And back on the East, Philly has some news as well. I've run out of time to tell you what it is, but Justice has plenty. Next.